Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are watching this, when you're watching this, what time of day, wherever you are. Hello. So I am doing a brief live stream that I'm going to turn into a podcast episode for my Business Fabulous podcast. So it's just going to be an extra episode. I already have 5 in the can. So if you happen to listen to podcasts, go wherever you go to listen to podcasts and search for Business Fabulous. That's my podcast. Or you can go to my website, bonnielfrank.com, click on podcast, and they're all there. So I wanted to talk about outsourcing, and this is just I'm going to do about a 15-minute informational talk about outsourcing. So when people mention outsourcing, what they mean is they're going to give away some responsibilities that they have been taking on. They're going to hand them over to someone else. They're going to outsource that. They're going to outsource that information. So a lot of times you'll hear, oh, I hired a VA, right? So they hired a virtual assistant. I hired an OBM. I hired an online business manager. I hired somebody to do my books. I hired a social media manager. I hired somebody to take over my Facebook group admin responsibilities. I had somebody, I hired a Facebook ads person. I hired somebody to do funnels for me, whatever it is, right? Email marketing, whatever it is. There's loads and loads, really an endless list of things that we as entrepreneurs need to do on a daily basis. And so you cannot do it all. You simply cannot do it all. You can try to do it all, but you can't. And if you try to do everything, you're going to end up doing, I was going to use an expletive, but I've got a clean podcast. You end up doing kind of a very average job or just slightly above average of a lot of different things because they're not in your wheelhouse and you're trying to do things that they're not your expertise. You're really not good at. And so I recently hired my first employee. I recently hired somebody to be my social media manager. So I've had my business for about 5 years now, and I've done absolutely everything myself, literally every single thing myself. I think I hired somebody one time to to do some HTML to hook up something on my website. But really, other than that, every single thing you've seen me do, good or bad, has come from me. I've done it. And as I have grown, as my business has grown, and as I have plans to grow more and grow faster in the coming future, in these coming months, I knew that I was going to have to hire somebody. And I thought a lot about, do I want to hire somebody to edit my podcast, because that can take a lot of time, or do I want to hire somebody to do my social media, because that can take a lot of time too. In fact, for me, they both take about the same amount of time a week. So they can take a few hours a week. And that's with me just really trudging through the very arduous task of making extremely simple graphics for my social media. It takes me a long time to do graphics. I do not have a graphic design background. I think that is pretty obvious. So that's why my graphics are so simple. Oh, Bonnie, they're so clean and simple. Yeah, because that's pretty much all I can do. So I really thought about it, and I researched different people to hire for editing my podcast, and I researched people for being like a VA, for just doing social media, and then I also researched people for being more of a social media manager and really not only taking over all of my social media, but helping me to build my platforms. They're all built organically. I almost never do ads. And so to helping me build them in a cohesive way and that aligns with all of my branding and really works with Business Fabulous, the podcast I just launched, and a brand new program that I'll be putting out. Plus, I'm starting to do more speaking gigs. I'll be speaking at She Podcast in October, starting to do more public presentations. And so there's a lot of things going on that I need to really concentrate my time and my energies, my efforts on. And I don't need to be doing my daily social media posts. Doesn't mean I'll never post on social media. Of course I will. But I don't need to be doing those daily, at least twice a day posts that I've been doing. And that was really eating up a lot of my time. So I decided, I really looked very hard at my podcast. And I spent about 5 months really... I had more resistance starting my podcast, and I'm going to do a separate podcast episode on that. I had more resistance starting my podcast than I've ever had doing anything ever before. Ever before. It was harder for me to launch my podcast than it was for me to do anything I've ever done. Literally. Anything I've ever done. I've never had so much resistance. I had full body experiences over it. It was just ridiculous. It was crazy making. And all because, more about this later, but all because I took a course that was supposed to teach me how to do it, and it really was a horrible course. And so I didn't learn how to do it, and so I had to teach myself everything, which is what I was trying to get away from taking the course. So I really, really looked at that, and I thought for sure, okay, I need somebody to help me edit my podcast because I'm so freaked out about even starting a podcast, but I knew I wanted to do it, and it would drive my business now. And so I knew I was going to do it. I was absolutely going to do it. I went to PodFest in March. I was absolutely going to go through with launching my podcast, but I had to figure out how to do it. But I thought I needed help with the editing. Well, as it turned out, I talked with a good friend of mine who is a systems person. So she had 2 very large corporations that she built herself, and she was really into systems, creating a system for everything you do. So I really talked to her a lot. I mean, a lot. In the 5 months about systems to create my podcast and systems to launch it and systems to edit it and systems for everything because I wasn't doing things in an efficient manner. I really wasn't. I didn't have a system for anything. I was just trying to figure everything out. So I was going round and round and back and forth and crazy. So I needed a system for all of that. So she talked about the system that she had created, and she sent it to me. She sent like a checklist of everything that she does when she creates her podcast. And then we really talked through it. I mean, and she talked through it with me a lot over the 5 months, not just once, many, many, many times until that information was able to sink in. Because all of the information was 100% foreign, and I had anxiety on top of that, which really makes it so like I can't hear you. You could be screaming in my face and I won't hear you if I'm like completely full of anxiety. So, which doesn't happen often, but it happened over starting the podcast. So I finally created a system for launching my podcast and for doing my podcast episodes every week that don't create the podcast of my dreams. It's not edited precisely the way I would want it. I'm going to move my camera back. It's not edited precisely the way I want it. It doesn't have any bumpers. It doesn't have the bumpers that I would like. It doesn't have the sound that I would wish in my dreams, right? I know what good podcasts sound like. Anyway, I know what I should be hearing. And I'm not hearing that with mine yet. I've been through 3 mics already in 5 episodes. In fact, in the first 3 episodes, I went through 3 mics. 2 gave out on me after I'd published them. The first 2 don't have great sound. I'm telling you right now. They just don't. It's great content, but it's not great sound. So if you know me from Periscope, just think back then when my mic was my little Apple earbuds mic, that little 1-inch mic. Just pretend it's that, and you'll forgive me. Still great content. And then the sound got better because I got this mic. This is a Rode mic, my third. So I figured out a system that worked for me so that I didn't have to hire a podcast editor, so that I didn't have to send away my podcast, have them work on it, have them send it back, and then, me put it up or they publish it, whichever. But I didn't have other hands on my podcast. And because the podcast is so very, very new, only 5 episodes, this is episode number 6 I'm doing, I was really nervous about handing it over to somebody, even though I had names of great people. And it was going to be an investment. That was absolutely going to be a monthly investment in them editing my podcast. It was going to be hundreds of dollars the way I wanted it a month. So I knew I was already going to need to invest money. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to create a system to do this. So I did hire a professional person off of Fiverr to do my intro. So like if you listen to my podcast, again, it's Business Fabulous. If you listen to my podcast, you hear me do just a teensy little intro that's maybe 30 seconds. And then you hear a professional woman, big difference, do an intro. And then I do the content. So that's the way it is. So in her professional version, there's music, but that's the only part that there's music. And that starts with episode 3, I believe. And so that's how it's going to be for a while until I figure out the next system that I want. And I already know how I want it to be ultimately, but I don't have time to do that right now. So what I did instead in terms of outsourcing is I hired a social media manager. Now, when I was looking at podcast editors, I really researched probably a dozen different ones. I got names of people and then I did my own research. I met a bunch of people, wonderful, wonderful contacts, incredible podcasters and editors and, oh my gosh, sound technicians, so many great people at Podfest. And I used a lot of those names, a lot of the people I met, plus a lot of people that they recommended. And I really did my research that way. And then when I was looking I thought I needed a VA because I'd always heard in these 5 years when everyone else was hiring VAs and I wasn't hiring anyone, I was doing everything myself. Everyone's like, oh, you need a VA. I hired a VA. I have a VA, virtual assistant. OBM, online business manager, everything was initials. So, and I didn't have any of those initials. I didn't have any of those people working for me. I was all of those people for my business. So as I started to reach out, I reached out in 3 different Facebook groups. And I said, that I needed a VA and that I needed someone to do social media and everybody, all the Facebook groups that I reached out in, pretty much the people knew who I was. So they'd already seen me on social media. So they knew it wasn't, it's not the hardest thing in the world that I was asking for, but I did need some help. But people in the 3 different groups, 2 groups were really, really, really helpful. One group was self-promotional, and I ended up just deleting the post because 2 of the people who responded were literally just promoting themselves in the thread, in the comments. So I just deleted the whole thing. But 2 of the groups, people were really helpful. And I kept hearing again and again about the difference between a VA and a social media manager, which honestly, I really did not know before I was looking myself. I really didn't. I thought a VA could do anything. Well, some VAs can do anything, and some VAs are just simply VAs, and they're really not very good at whatever it is. And I know some of my clients are having some trouble with that right now. And I've heard about that for years. I hired a VA and they did this or they messed up that or it wasn't worth it or whatever. I had to redo whatever, and I've always been so nervous about hiring a VA. Well, then people really started saying, you know what, Bonnie, you should really think about and really, really focus on a social media manager because you don't want just anybody to take over your branding. You don't have a brand new business. I don't. I have an established business. I've got clients all over the world. I speak all over the country. So I'm not just a newbie. I don't just have a new business. I have a specific brand, and I have brand colors, and I have my message, and I have all of these things that are set and that I've really built over the years. And I've got tens of thousands of followers, and I would like to keep them and grow them. And so the more I started hearing from people who I really do respect, the more I started hearing them say, you really need to look at and think about hiring a social media manager as opposed to a VA who you can hire for, I want a VA to do this, or I want a VA to do that, or I want a VA to do the other. And some VAs do social media. And some VAs do social media management for different businesses, and they do a fabulous job. I'm not here to say that VAs are good, bad, or otherwise. It's individual for the person. But when I wrote down everything that I needed them to do, and I really started thinking, I really do need a social media manager. I don't need a VA. I need somebody specifically who focuses on social media and who does social media for a living like I do. I don't need to be worrying about, nor do I have time to worry about somebody who doesn't understand the nuances of the different social media platforms. I need somebody who understands those completely. I need somebody who already knows the image size, the pixel sizes of everything that I need for my different platforms, for my groups, for my banners, for the cover art, for whatever it is. I need to be able to say, this is what I want. And they know that they need to make it a different size for LinkedIn. And they know it has to be different parameters for Pinterest and so forth. I shouldn't have to tell them that. I shouldn't have to teach them that. I wanted to do as little onboarding as possible. And so I really, really thought long and hard about that. And I got a recommendation I got two different recommendations from a woman who I really, really, I love her to death. She's now a good friend. I so value our friendship. And, but we had only known each other virtually until a Podfest, actually. So she gave me a couple of names of people. And the names, moving my camera around. Those of you listening do not see how shaky that just was, so you are much better off. So she gave me two names of people, and those two names were very strategically given to me, and I know that. Because one was more of a VA, and one is a social media manager who could not only do that, but she is like a jack of all trades. Like, she could do literally pretty much anything you ask her to do. And the woman who was referring names to me, she knows my business. She knows me. She knows where I am in podcasting. She knows that I'm just starting my podcast. She knows where I am and how I want to grow and how I am personally. And she also knows like who I would jive with, who I would click with. And so the names that she gave me, I loved both of those people. I love them. And I would have hired both of them, but I can only hire one. And so I hired the one who really focused more on social media, who could just take that over, no questions asked, bam, 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 and just run with it and make everything look better, way better than I could ever do, and can also take on pretty much any task that I'd ask her to do in the future because I know what she's already doing for my friend. So that was really, really helpful. So why did I go on here to talk about outsourcing? I did because I recently have had this experience with outsourcing. And I went on here because a lot of people who watch me, sorry about the camera work here, a lot of people who watch me are, they know that I've always done everything myself. They know that I've never hired anyone before. And so for me to now be at the point where I hire, I think it's really good and helpful information for whenever they would hire. So what did I do? I wrote down a list of everything I needed people to do for me. Well, really, what I needed them immediately, what I wanted to outsource, what I wanted off my plate, and then like I had another column which is like phase 2. So we haven't gotten to phase 2 yet. We've only just uncovered phase 1. So I've got that list. And I really thought long and hard about, do I hire someone for podcast editing or do I hire someone for social media? Because it was going to be one or the other. And the price that I was going to be paying was essentially the same. It really, the price was going to be equal. So it was just a matter of what was I going to outsource first, because I wasn't going to do both of them. I didn't want to spend the money on both of them yet. So I made my list. I thought about what I really wanted to outsource first, what my phase 2 would be, and then I got recommendations. So I got recommendations in Facebook groups. None of the Facebook groups, by the way, were VA Facebook groups. None of them, because I belonged to some of those too. None of them were those groups. They were other Facebook groups that I belonged to that have other entrepreneurs in them or other podcasters in them. And knowing that there were VAs and social media manager types in that group, but also knowing that these are people who hired those people and they could give me good referrals. So I asked questions in podcast and other entrepreneurial Facebook groups, and I took referrals from people who I'd met in person, and I took referrals from people who I know who are friends of mine, either virtually or in person or whatever. And they gave me those references. And I researched about a dozen different podcast editors and sound people, and I researched about just as many VAs and social media managers. Then, when I decided that I really wanted a social media manager, I interviewed 8 of them. So I researched a dozen, but 4 of them I did not interview. I interviewed 8 of them. I mean, I thought that was pretty good vetting. I really did. And they were all different types of people. Everybody I did over Zoom or over the phone, whichever was easier at the time. I asked them basically all the same, the same questions. I took notes with all of them. I had them all send me references and examples of their work, things like that. And really, the prices were all comparable. They really were. So it never got down to, well, I'm comparing the same work, but this one's cheaper. It was not like that. They were all around the same price. They really were. So I hope it's helpful for you. When I publish this podcast, in the show notes, I'm going to have a couple of links. I'll put in a link of a Facebook group that is filled with VAs. I'll also put in a link of a company that you can hire a VA from overseas because they tend to be less expensive if you want to go that route. I did not, but I'm going to put that in as well. And I hope that it's been helpful, if nothing else, to hear about how someone else goes about it. But I hope it helps you if you are looking for a VA or you're looking for a social media manager or you're looking to outsource anything. I don't care what it is, anything. I hope it maybe helps organize your thoughts a little bit and gives you some sort of a system to sit down and start to make those decisions, because those decisions can be overwhelming. They really can. And those decisions can just stop you in your tracks, and then it just stops your progress and freaks you out. So I don't want anybody to go through that. I went through that. I don't want you to go through that. So hopefully it's been helpful. Please let me know if it has. And if you haven't checked out my podcast, please do. It is Business Fabulous, available everywhere you listen to podcasts, or you can check it out on my website, of course, at bonnielfrank.com/podcasts. I'll see you guys later. Have an awesome, awesome day.